Florida State is not playing. In the past 6 to 8 months, they have taken the ACC, a seemingly respectable conference, and has exposed them as, well, I'll put it in a nice way, questionable. Yes, Florida State has went from the supposed kooks who doesn't understand what signing a contract means to being seen as the one who is actually holding the organization they signed the contract with. As, well, they're not fulfilling the contract. I have a special guest today. You know me, I have special guests on only if I like what they do. We're going to talk to him in just a second. Welcome to Clemson Football Live. Folks, listen to me. If you're new here, welcome, friends. I'm glad you're here. And even if you hate the look on my face, I love you too. Hope you'll subscribe. You'll pass it along. And yeah, it's free if you want to support the channel. Folks, TJ from Double Fries, No Slaw. Thanks for coming on, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Okay, let's dive right in. People want to hear from you. They don't want to hear from me. They hear from me all the time. And I brought this up to you before we went live. When I first started searching the whole Florida State lawsuit thing back in December, I ran across you. And I saw in the comment box people saying, hey, this guy's just a Florida State homer. He's just trying to get views. He's just trying to get people to be encouraged over basically a lost cause. They're not going to win this against the ACC. And then suddenly, the tables have turned, my friend. You're doing great. You know what's going on here. So I'm glad you're here. Let's just dive right in. Some of this stuff is going to be baseline stuff that everyone knows, but we need to start from the top. What encouraged Florida State or motivated them to not only go after the ACC, but turn around and amend the lawsuit and go nuclear on the ACC?
Yeah, I mean, I think it starts, like you just mentioned, like it is a very long, drawn-out process. Like, this is not a new thing that they're just all of a sudden starting to dive into. We've been talking about conference realignment on the Double Fries No Slaw channel since, I believe, January or February of last year. And so that was well before Florida State went off on their, everybody got upset when they had their board of trustees meeting in August, and then it started picking up steam, and then December is when they filed and all that. So we've been talking about it for a long time, and we were hearing those whispers for a long, long time that Florida State was going to take action and Florida State was going to do something. And really, from our folks that we chat with on the ground, the reason that they ended up doing all this is because they could not get any relief from the ACC. They went to the ACC and they said, hey, help us out with this. Hey, do this. Hey, can we get some assistance here? Can we talk about unequal this or unequal that? And the ACC basically told them year after year after, no, we're not going to do that. We're not going to do anything that you're asking us to do. Florida State was certainly, you look at what some of the other conferences have done in bringing teams in to kind of prop some things up. The ACC was not forward thinking in that at all, like the Big 12 has been. And so I think that Florida State just got fed up with it. And eventually that's why they filed, right? Why did they end up going nuclear? I mean, I think at this point, it just becomes like a nasty divorce. Just like you would in a nasty divorce, you would bring up every bad thing that spouse has ever done to you in any situation, who they did this with or who they did that with, or the time they forgot your anniversary or whatever the problem, you would bring it all up. You would bring every single part of it up, because at the end of the day, Florida State and Clemson sued for several different things, but they just got to win on one. And they just got to win on one thing. The ACC has to win on everything. So Florida State and Clemson know, like, hey, we're going to throw everything up against the wall that we can, and hopefully one thing sticks and we get out of here. So to me, that's why they've amended things. They've gone more nuclear. They've certainly tried their very best to get the public side on theirs. And so they've certainly gone off. Like you said, I like the way you put it, and gone pretty nuclear on it.
I mean, well, at the beginning of this entire process, Florida State and then Clemson backed off for a little bit. I like that they're playing another angle, because I've said, if we could get a couple of more schools to join in on different angles, all you have to have, as you said, one breach and everybody's in. The ACC has to guard everything. They have to win on everything. But I said this early on, that Florida State and then Clemson following was seemingly accused of, you don't understand what it means to sign a contract.
Yeah.
Well, Florida State has said, from what I understand, look, we're not saying that we didn't sign a contract, and Clemson's not saying that. We're saying that you're not upholding the other side of the contract. And at the same time, Florida State really amended, I love their amended lawsuit, TJ, where they started talking about John Swofford, his dealings with his son at Raycom. Would you dive in a little bit about that?
Yeah, the first part you mentioned, the group out there that says you sign the contract, you need to honor it or whatever. And yeah, like in a perfect world, that is how things work. But there's a reason that we have an entire subset of law that is contract law, because Florida State and Clemson are saying like, yeah, we signed this and you're not holding up your end of the agreement. And so to everybody in the comments or everybody, that just doesn't understand that, yeah, Florida State and Clemson are not saying that we didn't sign this and agree to it. We're saying, hey, we signed and agreed to this, and you're not holding up your end of the bargain. And so what should Florida State and Clemson do in that situation? If they truly believe, now you may not believe that they truly think that. You may just think that that's their way to get out, and maybe it is. But if they believe that that the ACC is not holding up their end of the contract, like what are they supposed to do? Just stay in a bad deal? Like stay in a bad, just stay where they're at when they think that the other side is doing them wrong? No, that's why we have contract law. That's why millions of people go to school to be contract attorneys so that we can figure this stuff out. So yeah, I think that, that's kind of your first subset. So then going into it and they've amended some things and talked about the Swoffords, and, it is very convenient that, John Swofford had some relatives at Raycom, kind of gave them a sweetheart deal that did nothing to expand the brand of the ACC. And Florida State's not afraid to call that out, at the very least, right? In its most innocuous or most, non-offensive way, that's just incredibly lucky that Raycom was able to end up with that sweetheart deal. If we look at it, we probably could say there's a little bit of nepotism going on. There's a little bit of probably nefarious dealings going on, because nothing just happens by chance or coincidence. We understand that money rules the world, and maybe some of former Commissioner Swofford's dealings that were happening back then in the older days, right? Like the mid 2000s, maybe they weren't all with the best intentions in mind. Maybe they did set this conference back a long ways because, hey, we've got a media entity here. Let's just go in business with them. Let's just make sure that their deal is sweet. Let's make sure that we've got them locked in. Oh, it benefits some family of mine. Even better. Let's roll with that. So, yeah, Florida State not afraid to call that out at all.
Before we go any farther, because there's a lot more questions, not only with the lawsuit, but with the Florida State season. Of course, our old quarterback, DJ Uiagalelei for Heisman. I want to talk about that, but let's just pause here for a second, and I want your opinion on this. This is an opinion thing. No one can nail this down unless, the person himself admitted to it. Do you really believe that John Swofford and that group of ACC executives were attempting to leave some type of legacy congealed at least till 2036? Do you think that maybe that was one of the reasons they signed the deal no matter what the deal really looked like?
Yeah, I think part of it could be that. Part of it could be the idea of like, hey, we're going to be responsible for the like you just mentioned, the legacy of the ACC, what this conference is thought of going forward. And, at the end of the day, I think the ACC has always thought of itself as a basketball conference first. And that's where their priorities have been. And that's what they've wanted. And so if you're looking at yourself like that and you are thinking of yourself as a basketball conference first, then who cares, right? Like who cares what ends up happening with football? Now, to their maybe credit is maybe the right word. I just don't think they were incredibly forward thinking. I don't think they were incredibly aware of what was going to happen. And not that they could be super aware of what the media landscape of college football was going to look like just 10 years later, 15 years later, 20 years later. Obviously, they would have no idea. But to pigeonhole yourself into such an agreement without having any possible ways out was just really dumb on their end. And could you just call it straight ignorance? Could you just say, hey, they just didn't realize what was coming? And well, Big 12 didn't realize what was coming. The SEC didn't realize what was coming. All of these other conferences didn't necessarily realize what was coming either and they still had the foresight to not lock themselves into bad deals. And so maybe it was just unlucky. Maybe there's a part of it that, yeah, like we want to have been the ones that kind of control what happened. But either way, you got to have a little bit more forward thinking to not lock yourself into something that ends up being your demise.
I mean, that's a great point. And then when you look at the allowances or the requirements for other conferences when it comes to a member school wanting to leave, and then you compare it to the ACC, it is like a joke. So let's kind of hang there for a second. You were talking about a basketball conference. We saw the Big East. The Big East was an unbelievable football conference with Virginia Tech. The U, when the U was the U. Syracuse, when Donovan McNabb and Marvin Harrison was doing their thing. They were all in the Big East. Today, the Big East is home to the national champion men's basketball championship, UConn Huskies. If it's that important to them to just keep the whole basketball thing together, why not allow Clemson and Florida State to just go ahead and say, peace out?
Well, the revenue just doesn't come, right? Like they're not able to keep the same amount of revenue at that point. And so, yeah, they love basketball, but they love money more, right? As we all probably do. I could stop watching basketball if somebody paid me enough, right? And so, yeah, I think that's part of it, right? Like they just know that that's what's holding the conference revenue together. We talk a lot about the ESPN being able to end the agreement in 2027. And I think they probably have already let the ACC know that they have ended that they're not going to renew in 2027 at that same rate because they know that Florida State and Clemson aren't going to be there. And so, yeah, I think they love hoops. I just don't think there's any money in it. There's no TV money in hoops, maybe is the better way to say it, right? Like you can make plenty of money at your university. Virginia and Duke prove that you can do it all the time, but there's no TV money in it. And so, yeah, I think that, as much as they would love to be a basketball conference, and that's where they really feel like they've built themselves, they know that that's just not a profitable way to go about it.
Especially when you consider that the women's basketball championship actually had more views. Now, we know that was for Caitlin Clark, and she's departed, but had more views than the men's national championship, which I think was the first. So let's talk about where we're at with the lawsuit in regards to Florida State. Where are we at? Kind of give me some detail, some bullet points here of where we're at and what you expect to see in the next, well, you can name the time frame.
So I'll give a high overarching view of, I think that this ends up getting settled. Like, I don't think these court cases go to completion. And so maybe that's anticlimactic to start with that. But while they are going on, we are certainly covering them as if they are going to go to completion, because you just never know. Like I could be wrong on that summation. Right. And so updates are Florida State sued the ACC in Florida. The ACC sued Florida State in North Carolina, just like saying, mirror images of what's happened with Clemson. Both parties asked for the cases to be dismissed. The North Carolina case was not dismissed when Florida State asked it to be. They've appealed that, and we are actually waiting on the judge to give us an update on that this very week. Florida State did blurt out in court the other day that they would take that decision all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court if they needed to. We'll see what happens with that. But they're going to just continue to fight and battle and try and get small wins here or there while it's going on. That's what's going on in the North Carolina case, where Florida State sued the ACC in Florida. Florida State had their case actually dismissed with an intent to refile. Florida State has, I believe, already refiled that. I just don't think that it's out yet. I think they had 7 days to get it refiled. That deadline is either today or tomorrow. So should be refiled very soon. They just had some language in it that the judge was like, you need to redo this. I expect their refiling to be even stronger than the last couple of amendments that you've seen. I think it's going to continue to progress up and up and up. And so all that said, we haven't made it very far. Like we haven't even determined if the cases are going to continue to go on. I assume they will both go on. They will both run congruent over the next, I don't know, however long until both parties settle, essentially is what my gut is.
Sure. In consideration of the basketball statement you made earlier, and I totally agree with that. Everyone has to remember that basketball is massive in the state of North Carolina. The great one, Michael Jordan, played there. You have Duke, North Carolina, the whole Tobacco Road thing that's going there. the judge, who initially ruled in some favor of some form for the ACC in a couple of weeks ago, I looked up, I was just being nosy. I was like, I wonder where he went to school. And he's there in Mecklenburg County, where the ACC is in, that's their headquarters. He did his undergrad at UNC. I kind of wonder, as a conspiracy theorist, if maybe some of his old buddies back at the law school didn't know that was maybe going to happen. Therefore, that's why we haven't seen the University of North Carolina enter this lawsuit in some form. Who do you see joining us, if any, on this lawsuit journey?
Yeah, I mean, I think UNC will be the next to do it. I think they make the most sense. I think they're the program with the most sure landing spot. I think they would land pretty quickly in either the SEC or the Big Ten. I don't necessarily know that they would have their choice. I think they would kind of just go wherever they would end up landing. But I think they're close. There is some internal turmoil based on some folks that I've talked with at Florida State that are pretty well aware of that situation. They've been in some of those meetings with those folks. There is some definite internal turmoil on what to do. And I think part of them is just waiting to kind of continue to see what happens with Florida State and Clemson. It's not a quick process. Like I said, I still think it gets settled, but once more is known, I could see UNC being the next to do it. My gut says, I guess after that would be like either Virginia or Miami, but I'm less confident there. Like, I think UNC is your third one without a doubt.
The reason I would pump my brakes on University of Miami is because their current athletic director, Dan Radakovich, was our athletic director when all of this was signed. He has more than towed the company line for the ACC on his comments. I kind of wonder what's driving that, if it's current or former relations to the ACC, but I'll leave my comments to myself there because I don't know the man.
Unnecessarily, by the way. He came out in full support, like, oh man, we're so happy with our partnership. And I'm like, dude, you don't have to say, you don't have to say anything. Silence is not an admission of guilt, but you just look like an idiot right now, so I don't know, maybe they don't have a landing spot. So Florida State guys will always bag on them though. So
of course you will. Of course you will. So let's dive into the Florida State season. We know what happened this year. It went into overtime. You won 31-24. I think that was one of the best games, even though it was a loss. It was one of the best games that Clemson played all season. I think that was one of the toughest games that Florida State played all season. Jordan Travis, when he left that game, I was blown away by him. I mean, I knew he was a good athlete, but there's a lot of good athletes at this level of football. I walked away from that game going, this guy is unbelievable. He's gone now. You have DJ. Talk to me before we get on the whole DJ thing. We know some of the players that you guys have lost, and if you want to go over some of the players that you've lost, please do. But tell me a little bit about some players that you have high hopes for this year for Florida State, getting you into that now triple-sized from 4 to 12 college football playoff. Tell me some of those players' names that we would overlook.
Yeah. Well, we're just trying to get to a point where if we win all our games, we don't get left out of it. So that's our hope this year. But I think that you're having to replace. I mean, Florida State put the third most players in the NFL, or the second most players in the NFL draft this year. And Michigan took first because they had 4 guys go in the 7th round, and 7th rounders count too. Like, I'm not trying to, but like Florida State was ahead before that. And so they put 10 guys into the NFL. They put Kalen DeLoach, who caused the fumble that basically turned the game around. I think he's gonna make the roster with the Bucs, even though we haven't even reached minicamp or anything. But just some things I'm hearing living here in Tampa. I think that they have 11 guys, if not maybe another guy sneaks onto a roster somewhere. But I think they have 11 guys on rosters from that team, and I think it's going to be pretty impressive to watch what some of those guys can do in the NFL. Obviously Verse was a big part of what they did. Braden Fisk and Jordan Travis. Keon caught not only the game winner, but the touchdown early when Florida State couldn't get much going offensively. I mean, they were a really good team this year, and they had a lot of top end talent. This upcoming season to me, they're not as talented. Like, they're just not as top end talented as they were. But some of the reports are that they have more depth. Like, they just have more around the program. Like they've continued, they're still not recruiting at an elite level, but they've continued to recruit better and better and better every year under Mike Norvell. They've used the transfer portal really well, which I know that's maybe foreign to some Clemson fans. We'll talk about it maybe later, but I think that they've done a good job of continuing to build up the roster, and the roster has less top end talent than it did a year ago. There's no doubt about it. There's not a wide receiver that's going to go one pick less than the first round. There's not a defensive end prospect that is Jared Verse, although there's a really good one in Marvin Jones Jr. that is on the roster. Former five-star that transferred from Georgia. Florida State's just been a defensive end factory the last few years. But I think there's just more talent everywhere and there's more depth, and that will help them. Now, is it going to get them to 13-0? I don't think so. Like, I think back-to-back years of 13-0 is probably unlikely. What does DJ U give you? I don't know, right? Like, that's always kind of a mixed bag. We've heard some good things. We've seen some good things, but there's also been like, well, he sometimes makes some DJ U plays. And so there's more talent overall, less top end talent. So what does that end up meaning for the season? I don't know. I mean, their Vegas odds are to win the ACC just like Clemson's are. They've got the same win total as Clemson at 9.5 games. If they overachieve just slightly, they'll probably win 10, 11 games. If they underachieve just slightly, they'll probably win 8 or 9, right? So still going to be a really good team, a lot of talent on it. It's just, can the collective unit be better than that top end talent that they had last year? I think they're going to put another 9 or 10 guys in. I think they, you can write it down now. Your listeners can mark this, timestamp it, and troll me next April. But I think they're going to put between 8 and 10 guys in the NFL draft again next year. Like, I think they're that deep. I think at corner, Azariah Thomas might be the best cornerback in the conference. He is great. Marvin Jones Jr., again, could be one of those guys. Pat Payton won the ACC's Rookie of the Year 2 years ago. He was an absolute freak, and then got to play with Jared Verse and all those guys on the defensive line. I think that Darrell Jackson and Josh Farmer could be like second, third round guys there at defensive tackle. I think Darius Washington's one of the best offensive linemen in college football. He could be drafted. I think there are some guys at that running back position that are really good. I mean, I think DJ went to Florida State because he thinks it's going to help him potentially get drafted. And do I think DJ is going first round? Probably not. Do I think DJ will excel under Mike Norvell and have a chance to get drafted? Yes, because Mike Norvell just put Jordan Travis into the league, who wasn't allowed to throw the ball when he got to Florida State. They only let him run. So I think Florida State's going to have another good run at the draft next year. I don't think it'll be quite the same way it was this year, but I think they're going to be really, really good.
You open up Dublin, Ireland, week 0.
Love it.
Against Georgia Tech. That's going to be incredible. I looked at your schedule. It's quite favorable. I believe by the time you play Florida, their head coach will not be their head coach. Miami, the seat is very hot for Cristobal. And for me, for some of your viewers who are watching this because you're on my channel, I'm like an advocate for losses. Yeah, losses are bad, but how did you lose? In the games, how he lost those games, it was just coaching malfeasance. I mean, that's really what it was. How do you feel about this season? And because for me as a Clemson fan, you have a few games that will test you. We will test you. But is there any games that's like sticking out to you on your schedule that makes you go, we can't win that one? Or are you basically going, I think we're going to steamroll this one, except for maybe a game here? That's a toss-up in our favor.
Yeah, no, I think the schedule sets up very favorably. And I think Florida State is, everybody uses the word back, right? You use Miami. They use it every offseason. I don't know that Florida State is back. I mean, they won 10 games and 13 games, in back-to-back seasons, which is really good. And they should win another 10 this year, right? And so I think that they're back, though, to like not struggling with the bottom tier teams, right? Like, I think they're back to a point of Florida State's going to go out and take care of business against the Syracuses and the Boston Colleges and the Georgia Techs and the teams like that. No offense to any of those programs, but like Florida State should never lose those games, right? Or it should be like a 1 every 10 years type thing, right? Fluke game where they maybe have a great year or something weird like that, where Syracuse, a few years ago upset Clemson or upset this team or that team. But they've gotten back to the point where you're not having to wonder. A few years ago, you had to wonder, could Florida State beat Duke? Could Florida State beat Pitt? Could Florida State beat this or team or that team? And I think Florida State's gotten back to the point where that's no longer a concern, right? And it hasn't been a concern. You think about Clemson. It's not been a concern for Clemson. I mean, you're going to have an upset here or there every couple of years. That's fine. But teams that Clemson's not supposed to lose to, they don't lose to. Florida State was struggling with those teams for a long time. The end of the Jimbo era, all of Taggart, the first couple of years of Norvell, they couldn't beat the teams you're supposed to beat as Florida State. And so they've gotten over that hump, and you look at the rest of it, and this is what Florida State and Clemson are supposed to be. They are supposed to steamroll everybody in the ACC, minus maybe a couple. NC State's going to have a good year this year, I think. I think Louisville will have another good year. Miami will have a decent year if Mario can get out of his own way. And so those games are tough, but outside of that, you shouldn't be losing to any of those other teams. And it's not just Florida State and Clemson. Like Oklahoma, Texas was kind of the same thing in the Big 12 when they lose to a Kansas or something like what are they doing, man? They got an easy path to 10 wins without even thinking about it. And so, yeah, the schedule sets up really favorably. They get the opener in Dublin at Georgia Tech. They're already like a 12.5-point favorite in that game. They get BC coming home, the next week. They have Cal, they have SMU, they have Memphis, and then they welcome Clemson to town. They should be 5-0 going into that Clemson game. Like worst case scenario, they should be 5-1 coming out of Clemson. And fortunately, you get Clemson at home this year. Now, I think Clemson kind of dominated that game last year, and Florida State was just incredibly lucky to have gotten that or made a really good play. I don't want to call the sack fumble return a lucky play, but just made a really good play when you had to, when I think the chips were kind of stacked against them. But worst case, I mean, you beat them, you go on a few more weeks, Miami on the road, if Mario can get out of his own way, that rivalry game is always tough. And then you got to go to South Bend. I mean, those are the 3 games. If you go 1-2 in those 2 games, you probably are going to the playoff, right? If you go 2-1, you are absolutely in the playoff. But, it's a 3-game schedule. It's Notre Dame, Clemson, and Miami. And could any of those other teams upset you? Absolutely. If they do, it's a big problem. It is a massive problem if you lose to anybody else on this schedule.
Now, I was looking at your schedule, and unless I've overlooked it, and I'm looking at it again, I'm not saying it. You guys, you don't have to play NC State. They just got Grayson McCall out of Coastal Carolina. I've seen him play several times. In fact, I'm salty, as people like to say, that we didn't even make an attempt at the guy. But, of course, Sweeney doesn't like transfer portal action unless he's getting a grad assistant to dress up as a football player. But anyway, that's another subject for another time. You have DJ coming in. DJ is the epitome to us Clemson fans of when everything started falling apart. Now, in 2020, the guy filled in for Trevor Lawrence, who couldn't play because of the sickness that was going on then. He threw for the most yardage that to this day has ever been thrown against Notre Dame, passing Carson Palmer that he threw in 2002. He threw for 439 yards against Notre Dame. We thought we had the second coming. It didn't happen that way. He went to Oregon. His passing yards was a little more than what he had been at Clemson, but the touchdown interception production's about the same thing. It kind of in closing here, Norvell is a good coach. What do you think that he does to get DJ out of his head and take him to the player that, I mean, I'm telling you, DJ, I've seen him throw passes that would make you go, that's a first rounder. And then 2 plays later, you go, he looks like he should be playing D3. What does he do? What voodoo magic does he work to fix what 2 other coaches can't?
I don't have like a one-liner, one-word answer. And I wish I did, because if I did, then I'd be making millions coaching where Norvell is instead of making YouTube videos. But I do know this. I know that when Jordan Travis got to campus at Florida State, which preceded Mike Norvell getting here, they did not let him throw the ball. And Mike Norvell wasn't even sold on Jordan Travis because he went out and tried to get Mackenzie Milton, who was playing on one leg there in that 2021 season, because he just wasn't sold that Jordan could be the guy. However, Mackenzie pushed Jordan. Something turned on, a switch flipped, and Jordan became a quarterback who ended up getting drafted to go and play for the Jets. And I don't know that Jordan's going to have an incredibly illustrious NFL career, but I think he can make a lot of money as a backup and get in some spot situations here or there. We'll see what happens with Rodgers' health this year going forward. I'm cheering for him, but I don't know what he did to make Jordan Travis somewhat competitive, somewhat a great college quarterback with Heisman odds, where obviously Jordan Travis being the most important player in all of college football that held his team out of a college football playoff. I'm obviously still a little salty there, but I'm hoping he can replicate it. I'm hoping he can replicate it with DJU. I've got a suspicion that a lot of what he's going to do is try and take as much pressure off of him as he can. I think something that Norvell does incredibly well is he builds running backs. I think right now Norvell has 6 running backs that he's coached from Memphis to Florida State that are on NFL rosters. Actually, it's 7 because he's got Corbin there as well, who came in as a transfer. He's got 7 running backs that he's coached from Memphis to Florida State that are on NFL rosters right now. That's absurd. And they are loaded at running back. Again, Lawrence Toafili, who was kind of the hero of the ACC championship offensively when you couldn't get anything offensively going. He had the long run out of the Wildcat. You've got Roydell Williams, who came in from Alabama, highly sought after and touted guy. You've got a couple others, Keziah Holmes and others in that backfield, and then a kid who was a 5-star in Cam Davis, who you just signed, ended up dropping to as a 4-star because he was hurt and injured. They have a stable of running backs, and I think they are 60 to 65% run heavy this year. I think the offensive line has improved year over year every year as well, and they are better run blocking. They are pass blocking, not bad pass blocking. They're just really, really good running the ball. And so I think that Florida State will lean on that as much as they can. Florida State's offensive line also wasn't very good the first couple of years Norvell got here. And so he had to be really, really creative with getting Jordan outside of pressure, just getting him outside of the pocket and scrambling him, rolling him out, leaning a lot on RPO. I think he's going to do that a lot with DJU as well. I think he's going to give him several options. He does a really good job of simplifying things. Hey, you've got 1 read, 2 read. If not, you're off. Like, you're off either your legs or here's your dump off. Get it to this guy in space, 3 yards down the line of scrimmage, and let him go make a 7-yard play for you, as opposed to having to take the 50-yard shot that is a 50-50 ball and who knows what happens. So I think Norvell does a few things well. Again, I think he leans on the run. I think they do a really good job of simplifying things for their quarterbacks. And I think, again, whatever that magic formula that worked for Jordan Travis is what he's going to try and implement with DJU. Will it be successful? Time will tell, right? Well, August is closing in, but I'm hoping that it can work. I also think, going back to the schedule, wrap up with this, I think it's good that they get Georgia Tech, Boston College, Memphis, SMU, Cal before they, I don't want to say Florida State could sleepwalk their way through. Some of those games are going to be tough, right? Like, college football is still college football, and you don't just come out and wax anybody. But you got a little time to ease into it. You have to start with Georgia like Clemson does, or having to start with LSU like we did the last couple of years. You're getting to start with a little bit. And so all of those factors together, will they make things a little easier for DJ? Will he get kind of into a rhythm by that point? That's the hope, obviously. Now, I'm not going to predict whether that happens or not. I'd like to think it does, but that's certainly kind of where they think that they will have the most success and why things might work out.
If DJ fails, do you have a guy to replace him, and will Norvell replace him quick?
I think for him to fail, like they really just have to, like, he'd almost have to go opposite of what he's done, right? Like, he'd have to be worse than, what we've seen. And I think that is unexpected. I think it's unexpected for, if last year he had a better QBR than Jordan Travis did. Right now, it wasn't much. Like, it was a 10th of a point. But when and not that QBR is the end all be all stat, but if he maintains from there and he's giving you 2 touchdowns a game and a pick a game, or whatever that touchdown interception ratio is, 2.5 to 1 or 3 to 1.5 or whatever it ends up being, I think they'll be able to ride with that, because I think they're going to be so run heavy that it's not detrimental. Now, all turnovers are not created the same way. You throw a turnover at midfield, it's a lot different than if you do it on your own 20-yard line. So I think that kind of plays into it. To me, he'd have to be really bad to regress to a point where they would have to replace him. Who would they go to? They'd go to Brock Glenn, who wasn't great in the ACC championship as a true freshman, but does have an ACC championship as a starter under his belt, and then looked okay in that game against Georgia that obviously, like, we'd like to strike from our memory, but had more yards against Georgia's defense than Milroe had against Michigan's in the college football playoff. So again, not that I'm salty about that or tracking those kind of things, but yeah, if it got really, really, really bad, which I don't anticipate, I don't think he would, if he gives us the level of play that he did at Oregon State last year, Florida State's going to go 9-3. Like, that's just what it is. And that will be fine for a gap year. better. We have bigger expectations than that. We want to be better than that. But I think if he gives us the level of play that he had last year and doesn't regress, they'll go 9-3. If not, and he's really bad and regresses poorly, I guess they'll go to Brock Glenn and just kind of build toward the future. But I would anticipate that doesn't happen. Not that bad anyway.
I think Norvell leans on, like you said, the run and getting the ball out fast, and that would possibly get you to the Clemson game. Or, well, definitely get you to the Clemson game undefeated. Whatever happens with Clemson, you still have that favorable road. UNC. I mean, Notre Dame, to me, Notre Dame is just up and down. I mean, you just never know what you're going to get out of Marcus Freeman and his team. And then Florida is just a shell of history. They have the same jerseys. They play at the same place, but they are not Florida. So, well, TJ, thanks for coming on the show. Tell everybody where they can find you, how they can contact you, etc.
Yeah. If you go here on YouTube, it's Double Fries, No Slaw for all FSU type content. We do a lot of conference realignment there too. But then on College Football Addiction, it's the graphic that you see behind me, the signs behind me. We do a ton of college football conference realignment there, and then just talk about college football from a national perspective. So we talk about everything from SMU to Clemson to Alabama to Michigan to just kind of everything. And so Florida, if you hate the Florida State stuff, then check out College Football Addiction. If you don't mind the FSU stuff as much, then go check out Double Fries, No Slaw.
Perfect. Well, man, thanks for coming on the show. Everybody, I have a link below this video in the description to Double Fries, No Slaw. Check them out. Let TJ know that you saw him on this show. Folks, as always, it's good to be a Tiger, even when, well, we're not as dominant as we once were. Go Tigers.